Come ahead. Let's give a warm Hopkins County.
Thank you, Randy. I am honored to be here. I'm amazed that the Historical Society would have this many people. And it's just unique. I've been frank with you. I've made several talks to genealogical societies, but usually there's about 5 there or 7, and this is great. And it shows to me a real interest in the history, in local history, and that's a part of why I wrote this book. This book, A Courthouse Tragedy, is about Graves County in Mayfield. And a real funny thing happened when the very first speech I made about this was at the Rotary Club in Mayfield. And after I finished, Mayfield, there's the Madisonville Messenger. Mayfield has the Mayfield Messenger. And the Mayfield Messenger had my picture. And I'm a native of Graves County. And it said, local native returns. And then my picture underneath, A Courthouse Tragedy. So that was my initial, and I hope no one else saw that. Maybe they did, because I'm a lawyer, and I had tried cases in that old courthouse, a number of cases before. And the courthouse is like a lot of our courthouses, in that it had been, it's been totally renovated, and you wouldn't recognize the inside from what it was when this incident happened. Let me just give you a brief, for those of you, some of you know Mayfield very well in Graves County, but if not, let me just give you a brief geographical hint of what Graves County is like. When you cross Kentucky Lake, which formerly was the Tennessee River, there are 8 counties in what is called the Jackson Purchase. They're somewhat different from the rest of Kentucky. And I went on Wikipedia, as I was telling you, I noticed that Madisonville was founded in 1807. Well, the Jackson Purchase actually was bought from the Chickasaw Indians in 1818. And the people started moving into the Jackson Purchase in 1819. So it was a few years after Madisonville actually became a town. And there were people, I think, in this area, certainly in Muhlenberg County, even in the 1780s. Well, when there were people coming here in the 1780s, in the Jackson Purchase, it was still Chickasaw country. It was mainly used for their hunting ground. It was very good land overall, because it's really good farming land. Most of it's pretty flat. And so those farmers, they grew tobacco. Once it opened up in 1819, they just flooded that area. And they mainly came from Tennessee. Some came from Trigg County across the river, but mainly they came up from Tennessee. And they had previously come from Virginia, North and South Carolina, about probably the way the people came here. And so they moved into the area. There's 8 counties. There's one county that's sort of in the middle, and that's Graves. It's a county that's similar in configuration to Christian County. It's not quite as large, but it's almost as large. The land differs. The south part of the county is really good, flat farming land. And you had a lot of farmers there who would have, let's say 100 acres of land. And they grew tobacco, and they could make a darn good living doing it. I mean, it's how I got to school. And because you could raise money, you could make your money with dark fire tobacco, and you had the rest of you had a cow, and you had some corn, and you had some beans, and so forth. But then the north part of the county was more rolling. It wasn't quite as good farmland, and a lot of the people there worked in Paducah, the railroad yards, and that sort of thing. So it's sort of different type of people. There was always a great competition between, number one, the people who lived in Mayfield, which was the county seat, and they were talking about the railroad. You But I can go ahead, I'm back to talk. Well, the north part of the county was different than the south part of the county. And when you got the local elections, which is what this story begins with, you had the north part of the county, you had the south part of the county, you think you had the city of Mayfield. And so that was what was happening. That's the background of what was happening here. Let me tell you just a little bit about Mayfield in 1922. In 1922, Mayfield was a very progressive community. There were 8 passenger trains that went through Mayfield at that time. It was on the main line from New Orleans to Chicago. They had 1,500 people who worked in woolen mills. And they had salesmen in every state of the union. Mayfield bragged in 1922 that they had the more students, the third highest students going to the University of Kentucky as any other county in the state. So Grace County. So it was a pretty progressive place. 30,000 people. Doesn't have a 36,000 now. So it's against that backdrop, and it's right after World War I when this thing happens. 2 young men. One is named John T. Roach. John T. Roach grew up in the southern part of the county. His mother and father died when he was 6 years old. He lived his life with his uncles and aunts, wherever he could find a place to put his head. He ended up going to Fulton, to school, to high school. Unbelievably, for someone at that time and that age, he wanted to go to college. And he was able to go to Western, to school. There was no Murray State at the time. Western had been founded in 1907, I believe. So he went to Western school. And while he's there, he meets a young woman from Barron County, whose name is Lois Cole. And he ends up, later on, marrying Lois. She's a teacher. He becomes a teacher. And he also becomes the principal of a small school there in Grace County. He does what a lot of people did in that era, and I've heard my dad tell about it. The ones who went to college, about all they could have done was teach school. Well, you didn't make any money teaching school. I mean, you couldn't survive. I don't know what much they were making, but we're talking about in the 20s and 30s. It was tough. So what they would do, they'd go and teach for a while, and then they would jump from teaching to something else. Well, John Roach jumped from teaching to politics. And so he ran for the legislature, and he was elected to the legislature for 2 years. Then he comes back home. Of course, you don't make any money in the legislature either. He moves into Mayfield, and he decides, I'm going to run for county clerk. World War I intervenes. Whether he volunteered or who knows. But he ended up going to Europe, and he was in France really in the sort of the cleanup. He was a captain. So he became a second lieutenant, and then went up the ladder and became captain. And then he came back home, and when he came back home, he decided he wanted to run for sheriff. Now, why did he want to run for sheriff? Well, a lot of reasons. Number one, the sheriff was the big guy in 1922. The county judge was the father of the county, but the sheriff, probably no state police, if there were, they never came to Mayfield. And the sheriff was it, no city police to speak of. So he was the law enforcement officer. But the big deal was, he made up to $9,000 a year. That's a lot of money. $9,000 a year because he collected taxes and he got fees from the collection of taxes. So it was a big job. Just to give you a comparison, in 1922, a fellow named Babe Ruth got a contract to play baseball for the Yankees, $50,000. So you can see what $9,000 was. So John T. Roach and his new wife, Lois Cole Roach, they had a little girl. She just was born in the 1920. He wants to run for office. She's teaching, and they have established themselves in Mayfield. He's teaching a Sunday school class at the First Methodist Church in Mayfield. He is also, head of all of the military, sort of like the National Guard from Elizabethtown West.